That was something that was very, very substantial when you think about the color line in the 21st century. Now, one might say we live within the United States where we have a constitution, and certainly we have laws. So when you have a particular law and you're innocent until proven guilty, a jury is of course set there. So one might say, well, how does that then impact? Well, this is where institutionalized racism come into play when you select a jury, and they might have some preconceived notions that Dr. Gordon Allport would talk about with prejudice. And one might try to tell a particular jury not to be. But then when all the facts are out there, one might still do, as you saw happen, to wrongly not accuse this person of a particular murder. Now, 1954 through 56, we had another issue that was quite similar, the Emmett Till case. You had a same type of a jury. They found those two men innocent. Here in 2013 with Zimmerman, they found him innocent. So this is an issue that is meant by institutionalized racism and how it has an impact. Now, what usually happens within our society it stems back to that hundreds of years of enslavement that gives people disproportionate opportunities in education, in occupation, as well as within economics. And that causes subgroups of people, say African American youth, to disproportionately not have certain opportunities. Now that's not to say, because I know some of the listening audience will say we have many, and certainly we do, percentage of African American youth as well as other ethnic youth that come from family members that are highly educated, have opportunities to allow them to have certain chances within society, and they do very well. But it's just a large percentage of people that do not have that opportunity and find themselves within the criminal justice system disproportionate. And this is the issue that we have to understand as being institutionalized within the society. We have multinational corporations, and you have to see that the prison system happens to be one of those. Dr. Charles C. McIntyre makes reference in her book to criminalizing a race, where she sees where prison systems are just like McDonald's or Starbucks. You have large numbers of people in there, you have to build more prison systems, you have to have more people to work in there, so it becomes functional within our society to have a subgroup of people to be disproportionate within those systems because it becomes a business.
And this is one of the things I think that the Attorney General is concerned about when we talk about incarceration of African American youth and etc. Say something in reference to that.
Yes. Well, that is a big issue because we are disproportionate within the prison systems as well as other ethnic groups as well. And some of the laws and things will have to change. We have to also see how it is systematic and then try to go into urban areas, rural areas, low-income areas, try to improve systems there with families working, trying to have programs there. As you can see within the government right now, they want to take away what they like to call set-asides and not to help people with Head Start programs, with outreach types of programs that are certainly needed in order to help the youth. Because if that's not there, these particular youth will certainly do something with their time, and in many instances, and more than likely, it's going to be a crime, and that will end up getting them into the criminal justice system. I would like to say one little quick comment about the education, because sometimes people feel like it's the teachers in the classroom. When we can have support by family members at home, then we'll be able to solve that problem. But it becomes systematic when you have to have people who are working or can't work and can't be home to provide for the children. So it's like a perpetual motion of problems that exist within poverty.
And so in a real sense, do you believe that more economic opportunities for African American youth, well, for youth period, would help solve quite a number of our social problems? I think you can recall when at one time we had CETA programs and Head Start and Job Corps and a lot of these programs, which many people believe to be expensive, but they were not expensive when you compare it to deaths and incarceration and et cetera, et cetera. Do you think that if we take that route that we might be able to change and turn some of these things around?
Absolutely. I know it would be. I mean, that's at the core of it. If we had job opportunities in junior high and high school for students to be able to go out and get skills, to then be able to work, I believe President Obama has tried to make a strong emphasis to try to improve everyone from pre-kindergarten all the way through so that they can develop themselves. And if they can have those types of programs out there, it would certainly be a plus. It would help youth to have opportunities to be able to be trained and to be able able to get employment. And that's one of the major problems. We don't have those types of programs in there. And then when we think about the paradigm that we talked about in the first segment, there's a big issue of affirmative action, and I was very pleased with our Supreme Court this time still supporting it, because we still live in a society where that is needed. And so there is that need for Head Start, for other type of seed programs, or educational innovation to try to help youth within our society to do better. Poverty is at the core of the issue. Racism is certainly connected to that. And with those things being recognized, we have to recognize it as a symptom before we can then do something about it.
Do you think, in other words, all of the money that we might be using to incarcerate individuals, regardless of why they are there and et cetera, but in the end, it all boils down to a large number and we have to pay for that. Do you think that part of that money could be diverted in a real sense to a large number of programs dealing with these young people, economic programs and et cetera, that it would have a tremendous impact upon American society?
Yeah, I believe you're absolutely right. I think if we put that type of fund and that type of emphasis on the front end of education, on the front end of helping families succeed, that could indeed help you.
We're going to have to stop for this second commercial break, and we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. Thank you and welcome back to the final segment of the show for today. We're talking to Dr. EKSanford from Tennessee State University, and he's talking about the implications in a real sense of some of the things that are happening in reference to institutional racism and the impact that it is having upon African American youth, as well as other youth in American society. But
Absolutely.
we are today specifying African American youth and within that regard. Go on.
Yes, and on the last segment, we mentioned how if we had money up front rather than placing it into the prison systems, how we could indeed improve African American youth. I think an excellent case study is Dr. Kennedy in Harlem. Over 70 blocks of pure poverty, where he has a school system there where he's able to take those students, and every one of them 100% graduates, and then at a high percentage, 100%, go on to the universities and they graduate as well. But he has a very innovative educational system that helps them. It's holistic. He brings in the family members, the community, and everyone that's involved. He makes sure they have something to eat, just like someone in a rich area would have something to eat. He makes sure they have health care, just like someone in a rich family would have a health care. So he takes a holistic approach, and if we had that up front to help people in different communities around the United States, I think we should certainly see a vast improvement with African American youth, as well as other ethnic groups that are in the criminal justice system. I wanted to also, if I could, pick up on how we started off at the very outset, thinking in terms of this institutionalized racism and Dr. Gordon Allport and the nature of prejudice. When you think in terms of it, he has a 5 scale on acts of prejudice. One he calls antilocution. And that's when groups of people might get around and they might congregate and they might talk about certain things. And some people in there may not act out in a very negative way toward others, but they might listen and agree and support it. The second one is avoidance. when you might want to avoid issues related to problems that might be in existence within our society. Oh, they live over there, or they live in a poverty.
That's not a problem.
That's not a problem for us. That's not our problem. And then the next one is discrimination. When that same group of people in interlocution or avoidance start to say, well, let me then send my child over into this area, or let's move to another area so we can avoid being with that particular group, or let's send ours to the private school. Then the next one is physical attack, going back to the same type of act on a prejudice that Zimmerman did when he saw a person. He had a prejudice, a preconceived notion that was unwarranted about another individual, and then a physical attack that would occur. And that's the pure nature of it, and even in the subconscious. And the last level Dr. Gordon Allport talks about, as we've seen in America and across the country, is that of extermination. That's an extreme act on prejudice. But I think what he brings out so poignantly in his book, The Nature of Prejudice, is that all of them are very inclusive to the last one that's the worst. But the last one, you have members that belong to the interlocution. So when you're voting in a certain way, or you're siding a certain way on an issue that's avoiding someone who's in need and voting against those types of issues, you are acting on a type of prejudice.
That's part of what we mean when we talk about institutional
racism.
But
you
declare that you're not a racist yourself, because you know some people, and et cetera, and et cetera, et cetera.
Yes.
But in terms of your subconscious, in reference to how you deal with that, you are in reality part of what we call institutional racism. It's there. And you don't want to admit it, but it's there anyway.
Yes.
Is that what we're saying?
That's exactly what we're saying. Now, I want to try to move it to a higher level, because sometimes within, let's just say, since the topic is African American and African American youth and institutionalized racism, sometimes African Americans who have moved up, had certain types of economic success, might feel that they have a false sense of reality as to where they might be within the society in which we live in, and feel that everything has been rid as far as racism is concerned. And sometimes that group that is indeed acting out in a very prejudicial way will look for a person of color, African American in particular, or any other ethnic group, who might think in that very same way. And that person might avoid trying to think consciously about how racism still exists. And what I usually try to ask a person, if they think because they have become highly educated, highly successful, if they went down to Jasper, Texas, and if their 550 SLC Mercedes had a flat tire, and if that same person driving that truck saw them walking up dressed up in their Giorgio Armani suit, but they were African American or another person of color, would they have done a U-turn and picked them up and dragged them as they did that person that they did that to? You see, sometimes we feel that we get so far removed from that because we become medical doctors or lawyers. And that's why I really appreciated President Barack Obama when he spoke about, well, yes, I'm president, but we still have this systematic institutionalized racism that exists within our society today. And it hits youth, it hits the healthcare system, it hits the educational system, it hits the economic system. All of those institutions that make up our society has that racism part that's still very present in it.
And a lot of folks don't want to deal with that, nor do they want to believe that.
That's right.
Somehow there is no institutional racism, and that all you have to do is to pull yourself up by your bootstrap, which might work sometimes. But if it's institutional, you might pull yourself up by bootstraps here, but they'll catch you over there somewhere. What we're talking about here is that we want to eliminate.
Yes.
Even though we might not be able to eliminate it, but make people much more aware of it.
That's correct.
And they can react to it differently.
Yes.
Is that what we're saying here?
That's exactly what we're saying. And there's a book entitled Privilege, Power, and Difference. And in this particular book, the author, who's a sociologist, suggests very strongly that those in the dominant group, meaning European Americans, have to understand this institutionalized racism in order to rid it. You can't get rid of it unless we can see it for what it is. It has to be diagnosed, no different than if you went to a medical doctor and they said you have the symptoms of the flu and you have to do these things to try to improve. We have to see that. And that's one of the problems, according to Dr. Joyce Leary, that we have in America, because we have never recognized or looked back on those 244 years of enslavement and said that's a problem that we have to include within our educational system to discuss, so all ethnic groups, the majority group as well as other ethnic groups, can talk about it. We have to see it as a ill, and then we can rid it and try to improve on it.
Over the last 2 minutes,
Yes.
somebody might be watching this show this morning and might wonder,